Hi everyone, I'm Karl from Cederato Coffee Farmers Collective. This is episode 3 of Coffee Economics with Karl. We're still talking about transparency in the coffee supply chain, but today we're going to start focusing on currency and exchange rates. I got a question on this topic after the first video where we really just brushed over this briefly, so today I wanted to start at the very beginning. This is video 1 of 3 on this topic, and today we're going to really briefly outline what are currencies and exchange rates. We're also going to look at an example of how a fixed price for the roaster in their own home currency may not be equivalent to a fixed price and stability for the farmer. Now that we're getting to several videos that build upon one another, you may want to look back and watch them in chronological order. So we're going to link them here in the description, one by one. We'll also link to a playlist here if you're watching this on YouTube, which will show them each in chronological order. So from the very beginning, what is the value of a currency? Well, a currency is a commodity, like any other, like rice or crude oil. So its value is relational. So it can only be coherently expressed in terms of another. So what is $1 worth? Is it worth 3 apples? Is it worth 1 can of beer? Is it worth 0.85 euros? And this is where we get to exchange rates. So an exchange rate is the value of a currency in terms of another. So we can't just say generally, well, the peso is strong today, the peso is weak today. The peso could be strong in relation to the Australian dollar, but have weakened in relation to the Japanese yen. So the value of one currency only makes sense if expressed in relation to another currency. In this video, we aren't going to get into what determines the value of a currency, how we arrive at an exchange rate, and why those values move. That's a very complex topic for another day. But we're going to suppose in this case that we're talking about a floating currency, a currency whose value is left to be determined by the free market. A currency's value can be controlled by the central bank or government that manages it. It can be pegged to another currency, one-to-one. It can be left to float within a controlled band in relation to another currency, or it can be left to float freely. In this case, we're going to take the Colombian peso as an example, which is a freely floating currency. That isn't to say that monetary policy doesn't exist. The central bank here, as in most countries of the world, does have certain levers that it can pull, but for the most part, its value is left to fluctuate based on the supply and demand for the currency. So let's take a super basic example, just to understand what is meant by the value of one currency versus another. I apologize in advance, I don't mean to insult anyone's intelligence here. Just for good measure, we're going to start all the way at the very beginning. So let's say you're on an origin trip to Colombia, you have 10 US dollars, you're going to convert them to pesos. What's the exchange rate? On the day that you're here, say this is 2012, the exchange rate is 2,000 pesos per dollar. So you hand in your $10, you get 20,000 pesos. Then what do you do next? You just got your first Colombian pesos in your pocket, you walk out in the street, well, of course, you buy empanadas. What's the price of an empanada? Empanadas are 2,000 pesos each. So with your 20,000 pesos, you can buy 10 empanadas. The value of 20,000 pesos is 10 empanadas. The value of $10 is 20,000 pesos. Therefore, the value of $10 could also be expressed as 10 empanadas on that day. Let's say you come back in 2016 and you also have 10 US dollars in your pocket. You got to exchange those $10 for Colombian pesos because you want more empanadas. But right now, say this is 2016, 3,000 pesos per dollar is the current exchange rate. So now, instead of 20,000 pesos, you get 30,000 pesos for your $10. You walk out into the street, you find someone selling empanadas, and they're still 2,000 pesos because the cost of goods that goes into making one empanada is all sourced locally and is not dependent on foreign exchange. So now, with your $10 or your 30,000 pesos, you can buy 15 empanadas. You can share them and you'll make a lot of friends. So moving on, Let's start with a really basic coffee example. Say you're a roaster and you want to pay a farmer a fixed price so that they are not vulnerable to the ebbs and flows of the global commodity market, of the C price. So you're going to set a fixed price which down the line translates to an FOB price of $2 per pound. And that's a fairly reasonable. We won't necessarily get into the calculation of how we found a $2 FOB price. Let's just take that for what it is for the sake of the example. Now this time you ensured that $2 FOB was paid to the exporter of this coffee that you're purchasing from a producer. The exchange rate at this time, COP, Colombian pesos, per USD, US dollar, is 3,000. So that will give us a farmer price of Colombian pesos per kilo parchment, 7,222. In the first video, we looked at a calculation of how we get from roaster price to farm gate price based on a series of different conversions of the currency value, of supply chain costs, of the parchment to green coffee yield. And we're not going to do that whole calculation right now. So let's just call this one of these. So $2 with a 3,000 peso per US dollar exchange rate, all the calculation done in this little print symbol here. That gives us 7,222 pesos per kilo would be what a farmer is earning if the FOB price is $2 at this moment in this scenario. The farmer has a production cost, let's say it's 6,000 pesos. This is also fairly reasonable production costs, about the average, what we're seeing with our partners here. And that will give the farmer a profit of 1,222 pesos. This is a 17% profit margin. So let's say this was 1 year. You purchased this coffee, made sure this farmer was paid this price. It's a fixed price. It doesn't change depending on the C price. Let's say next year the C price is a bit lower, but being committed to responsible sourcing and providing a stable quality of life to producers, you kept the FOB price fixed at $2. However, by this time, the exchange rate, Colombian pesos per US dollar, is not any longer 3,000, but 3,500. $2 FOB price at 3,500 Colombian pesos per dollar gives us a farmer price, Colombian pesos per kilo parchment, now of 8,426. Since the production cost is stable at 6,000 Colombian pesos per kilo, because our cost of goods are all denominated in Colombian pesos and sourced locally. This may or may not be the case in reality, but for the sake of the example, let's say it is. That being the case, the farmer's profit is no longer 1,222 pesos per kilo of dry parchment sold, rather 2,426 Colombian pesos per kilo of dry parchment sold. The amount of US dollars that the roaster made sure were getting to the farmer are the same, but the farmer's profit is significantly higher. It's now 29% profit margin. So this is an example of how a fixed price would not necessarily be fixed for everyone. If the roaster price is fixed and this amount of money is being transmitted back through the entire supply chain to the farmer, this does succeed in eliminating the risk of a fluctuating C price and its effect on the farmer. However, the farmer's income is still denominated in their home country's currency. They are still vulnerable to the risk of a currency value fluctuation with respect to the buyer's currency. In this case, the buyer's currency being fixed and the seller's currency depreciating led to an overall improvement in profitability for the producer, the exporter. However, this could just as easily go the other way and lead from a 17% profit margin to something much lower and quite easily negative. I hope you've enjoyed our third video on transparency in the coffee supply chain. This one was about currencies and exchange rates, and the next one will be about exchange rate risks and vulnerability to fluctuations in the relative values of currencies in the coffee supply chain. If you're just finding out about Cedro Alto through these videos, you should probably know that as a farmers collective, Our main objective is to sell the green coffees produced by our members to roasters in other parts of the world that appreciate these coffees and are willing to compensate farmers for their efforts. Right now, we have spot coffees in the US, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. And depending on quantity, we can deliver anywhere in the world. If you're interested in sourcing coffees through our collective group and partnering with one or more producers, feel free to reach out to me directly. My contact information is in the description of this video.